Just one question. Yes, just one. But when you ask it, the narcissist will reveal themselves in a way no mask could ever hide. It's not magic, and it's not a power game. It's truth illuminated through the timeless psychology of Carl Jung. Carl Jung, the great psychoanalyst, once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." And that is exactly what happens when you fall into the hands of a narcissist. You don't realize that you're being guided by an illusion, a mask designed to manipulate, dominate, and devour your identity. But if you understand the psychological mechanism Jung called the persona, the social mask each person wears, you'll begin to see this. A narcissist doesn't have a true self. They only have an empty mask. And all it takes is the right question for that mask to crack. In today's video, you'll not only learn the one question that can instantly expose any narcissist, but you'll also understand why they fear that question so deeply through the lens of Carl Jung and analytical psychology. If you've ever felt confused, manipulated, or wondered why they always avoid the truth, watch this video to the end. Because once you hear it, you'll never look at a narcissist the same way again. Part 1. The mask is not the person. A narcissist doesn't live as a real human being, they exist as a carefully crafted image. Carl Jung called this the persona, the mask we all wear to face the world. But for a narcissist, the persona isn't just a temporary social layer. It's their entire survival system. Without the mask, they have no idea who they truly are. Unlike emotionally healthy individuals who balance their inner selves with social roles, narcissists have no inner substance to balance with. They build an ideal version of themselves, always right, always good, always competent, and reject anything that threatens that image. They don't just dislike the truth, they can't exist if the truth is spoken. Here's what's important. The more intelligent a narcissist is, the better they are at constructing a believable false persona. Not all narcissists are loud, arrogant, or aggressive. Some are polite, charming, they may even appear like healers. But what do they all have in common? They cannot handle the truth, especially when it comes in the form of a simple question. You don't need to shout to break their mask. You only need to ask gently. When was the last time you were wrong and learned something from it? Then be silent and watch. You'll see an uncontrollable reaction. Denial, rage, deflection, or flipping the script to make you feel guilty. A real person reflects, admits, and learns. A false persona panics because there's nothing real to rely on. And in that moment, you don't need any further proof. You've seen what they've tried to hide their entire life. And once you see it, you'll never fall for the mask again. Part 2. The right question is a mirror, no need to shout. You don't need to confront a narcissist with anger. You don't need evidence, cameras, or validation from others. The only thing you need is the right question. A question that acts like a sacred mirror. Gentle, yet inescapable, reflecting straight into the false self they've spent their life hiding. Carl Jung said, "Truth does not need to be aggressive. It only needs to be seen." And in the illusion-filled inner world of the narcissist, even a single beam of that truth is enough to make the whole structure collapse. Narcissists are not afraid of you yelling. They are used to chaos. They're not afraid of your anger. They can manipulate that. What they fear is what they can't twist. A calm, honest question asked from a grounded person. Because in your calmness, they find no grip. They can't steer the conversation using emotional games when you hold your silence, your clarity, and your observation. The question doesn't have to be complex. It can be as simple as, have you ever been wrong? What did you learn after hurting someone? Have you ever truly apologized to anyone? It may sound gentle, but to a narcissist, it's a deadly blow. Because answering honestly would require a stable sense of self, a self strong enough to admit fault, grow, and mature. But they lack that foundation. They exist through the mask. And if they're forced to take off that mask, their entire existence trembles. When you ask the right question, you won't need to hear the answer. Just watch their eyes, their breath, the hesitation, how they instantly redirect the conversation or turn the blame onto you. That's where the truth reveals itself. Carl Jung believed the shadow doesn't disappear by being ignored. It only disappears by being faced. And narcissists are masters of avoiding their shadow. But you don't have to force them to confront it. Just place the mirror before them and they will react as if you attacked them, even though you only asked a question. That's why the right question is the most powerful weapon you hold. No noise. No need to win. Just clarity. Part 3. When a question becomes a tool for unmasking. Some questions aren't asked to get an answer. They're asked to observe how someone reacts. That's when a question stops being a tool for communication and becomes a mirror that exposes the truth. Carl Jung once said, "You cannot awaken someone who is pretending to sleep." And the narcissist is exactly that, someone living in a dream of their own creation. They don't seek truth. They seek blind belief from others to sustain the image they've carefully constructed. But when you ask something simple, seemingly harmless, like, "Where have you truly been wrong? And how did it change you?" you are placing a stone in the middle of their river of manipulation. A healthy person, when asked that, will pause, reflect, and share a piece of their learning journey. They might speak of a failed relationship, a poor decision, a moment they hurt someone and how they grew from it. That's a sign of real emotional maturity. But a narcissist doesn't have the inner space to do that. To answer honestly would require them to look within, and that is their deepest fear. They cannot admit to being wrong without feeling their identity collapse. So instead they will deflect. "I don't think I've ever done anything that bad." Justify. "I only reacted that way because I was pushed to the edge." Redirect. "Why are you digging up the past? Are you trying to blame me for everything?" These reactions aren't random. They're defense mechanisms to keep the mask intact. Carl Jung called this the defense of the unintegrated shadow. The more someone denies a part of themselves, the more violently they react when it's touched. And that reaction is the unmasking. You don't need to expose them with logic or debates. You just need to remain calm, ask the question, and listen to the chaos that follows. The truth isn't in what they say, it's in their desperate need to avoid saying it. A mature person faces their flaws. A narcissist distorts them. And when you ask the right question, you don't need anger, you don't need proof. They will expose themselves by simply being unable to answer. Part 3. When a question becomes a tool for unmasking. Some questions aren't asked to get an answer, they're asked to observe how someone reacts. That's when a question stops being a tool for communication and becomes a mirror that exposes the truth. Carl Jung once said, "You cannot awaken someone who is pretending to sleep." And the narcissist is exactly that, someone living in a dream of their own creation. They don't seek truth. They seek blind belief from others to sustain the image they've carefully constructed. But when you ask something simple, seemingly harmless, like, "Where have you truly been wrong? And how did it change you?" you are placing a stone in the middle of their river of manipulation. A healthy person, when asked that, will pause, reflect, and share a piece of their learning journey. They might speak of a failed relationship, a poor decision, a moment they hurt someone and how they grew from it. That's a sign of real emotional maturity. But a narcissist doesn't have the inner space to do that. To answer honestly would require them to look within, and that is their deepest fear. They cannot admit to being wrong without feeling their identity collapse. So instead, they will deflect. "I don't think I've ever done anything that bad." Justify. "I only reacted that way because I was pushed to the edge." Redirect. "Why are you digging up the past? Are you trying to blame me for everything?" These reactions aren't random, they're defense mechanisms to keep the mask intact. Carl Jung called this the defense of the unintegrated shadow. The more someone denies a part of themselves, the more violently they react when it's touched. And that reaction is the unmasking. You don't need to expose them with logic or debates. You just need to remain calm, ask the question, and listen to the chaos that follows. The truth isn't in what they say, it's in their desperate need to avoid saying it. A mature person faces their flaws. A narcissist distorts them. And when you ask the right question, you don't need anger, you don't need proof. They will expose themselves by simply being unable to answer. Part 4. Why narcissists cannot tolerate introspection. Introspection is one of the greatest gifts a mature soul can give itself. But for a narcissist, it's not a gift, it's a threat to their survival. They are not afraid of being hurt by others. They're afraid of facing themselves. Carl Jung once said, "You cannot enlighten yourself without confronting the darkness within." And that is exactly what the narcissist avoids, at all costs, that inner darkness. When you ask them about their mistakes, their wounds, or the events that changed them, you're inviting them to enter a desolate place they've spent their whole life covering with illusion. A healthy adult can handle introspection because they have a stable ego, a solid psychological foundation that allows them to say, "I've made mistakes, but I've learned from them." But narcissists have no interior. All they have is a stage, bright lights, and a script. There's no authentic self to return to when the persona collapses. And that's why they avoid truth like it's fire. The emptier someone is inside, the more decorated they become on the outside. Their life story is carefully edited, successes embellished, dark chapters deleted, old scenes rewritten to suit their current narrative. They cannot say, "I was wrong," because doing so would collapse the entire self-defense structure. Carl Jung described this as the protection of the false self, a shell so sensitive that even a gentle tap from a genuine question can trigger denial, blame-shifting, or rage. They don't hate you. They hate that you make them see themselves. And here's the danger. They don't even realize they're avoiding the truth. They've lived in their illusion for so long that they believe it. It's structural self-deception, and any act of introspection feels like a direct attack on the architecture of that lie. So they will do anything to escape, deflect, or make you feel guilty for even asking. Here's the truth. You cannot help someone reflect if they've never been willing to look in a mirror. And a narcissist is someone who has built an entire house designed never to contain one. Part 5. 3 typical reactions when you ask the right question. When you ask a seemingly simple question like, "Have you ever been wrong, and what did you learn from it?" you're triggering an instinctive response in the narcissist's mind. Not because the question is heavy, but because it strikes at a place they have no access to, self-reflection and accountability. Carl Jung once said, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." But for the narcissist, their entire psychological makeup is built to avoid pain by avoiding truth. So when you bring them to the edge of personal responsibility, there are 3 classic reactions to expect. These reactions are like a map that reveals the mask behind the persona. First reaction, gentle denial. They might smile and say, "I don't really make those kinds of mistakes." Or, "I'm a very careful person, so that rarely happens." It sounds calm, maybe even confident, but beneath the soft words is a complete refusal to acknowledge their own humanity. A mature person has no problem talking about their flaws because they've learned from them. A narcissist avoids it as if you're accusing them when all you're doing is asking something deeply human. 2. Second reaction, deflection, playing the martyr or boasting virtue. Instead of answering honestly, they might say, "I used to trust people too much, but I've learned no one's really trustworthy." Or, "I was wrong because I was too kind." This is how they flip the roles, from being the one who made mistakes to the one who was taken advantage of, from someone who should reflect to someone who deserves sympathy. Carl Jung called this the defense mechanism of identifying with the ideal self. They must always be the good one, or at least the wounded one. 3. Third reaction, defensiveness, anger, or emotional manipulation. If the first 2 tactics fail, they go on the offensive. "Why do you keep digging up the past? Are you trying to make me feel bad?" Or even, "You're not perfect either." That's when you know you've touched the deepest part of them, the shadow that Jung described as the starved soul. They cannot respond with maturity, so they try to control your emotions instead. What matters here is not their answer, but their reaction to the truth. Because the more someone avoids truth, the more you realize they're not living in reality, but in an illusion they've created to survive. Part 6. When they can't control the question, they'll try to control you. When you ask a simple question like, "Have you ever hurt someone, and how did you make it right?" the narcissist's first instinct isn't to reflect, it's to react. Because in that moment, they realize they can't control the question. They can't twist it to their advantage. They can't rewrite the script they're used to. And when they lose control of the question, they turn to the one thing they can still control: you. Carl Jung once said, "Nothing has a stronger influence than the attempt to make someone else carry the shadow." That's exactly what narcissists do. They can't tolerate the light of a real question, so they try to snuff it out by making you feel guilty, wrong, or too harsh. You'll hear things like, "Why are you always bringing up the past? Aren't you making this a bigger deal than it is? You're being really unempathetic right now." This is emotional manipulation at a high level. They lead you back to self-doubt, making you question, "Am I being too harsh?" Number, you're not. You just touched the part of them they've spent their whole life hiding, and they can't handle that. The problem isn't the question. The problem is that you're no longer under their emotional control. When they can't steer the content of the conversation, they'll try to manipulate the emotional atmosphere. They'll drain you, frustrate you, and make you feel like you're the one causing tension, when all you did was ask a profoundly human question. That everyone makes mistakes, and that doesn't make us less worthy. It makes us more real. Carl Jung called this the resistance of the immature ego, an ego that cannot absorb anything that doesn't reinforce its superiority. And when you ask about their flaws, you're asking something the false self was never built to answer. So when they can't manipulate the answer, they'll try to manipulate you. When they can't change reality, they'll make you doubt your perception. But now, you're awake. You see the game clearly. And the truth is, you don't need to change your question. You just need to stop letting them change you. Part 7. When you stop participating, they lose power. You don't need to win an argument with a narcissist. You don't need to force them to admit they're wrong. And you certainly don't need a confession to find your freedom. The only thing you truly need is to withdraw your energy, to stop playing the game they've scripted. Because the moment you stop engaging is the moment their power begins to dissolve. Carl Jung once said, "You cannot wake up someone who is pretending to sleep." And the narcissist is a master of living in a false dream. They manipulate, twist reality, and turn black into white. But none of that works unless you still react. Narcissists don't feed on truth. They feed on reaction. Every time you get angry, feel hurt, or try to explain yourself, you reinforce the illusion that they're in control. But when you respond with silence, composure, and detachment, you're not just withholding emotion, you're removing the psychological fuel they need to survive. This is not passive silence. It's a conscious decision made by someone who is awake, someone who knows they no longer need to prove anything, someone who knows that an unanswered question is already an answer. And for the narcissist, that truth is a death blow, because if they can't control you, they have no reason to stay. If they can't provoke a reaction, they'll spiral, scramble for a new script, or quietly disappear. But here's the key. Their retreat is not a victory for them, it's the result of your growth. Carl Jung called this process emotional detachment. When a person no longer identifies themselves with the wound, they reclaim inner sovereignty. They no longer fight for validation. They no longer hold on for loyalty's sake. They walk away because they've seen the truth, and there's nothing a narcissist can do with someone who has seen clearly. So if you're still waiting for them to change, still waiting for an apology, still hoping for closure, know this: the longer you wait, the more control they hold. But the moment you need nothing from them, you've already won. No script, no conclusion, just one truth. You're no longer playing their game, and that is enough. Truth is what they can't control, but you can. You don't need to be a psychologist to expose a narcissist. You just need to be yourself, an awake, grounded human being, willing to ask the right questions, and brave enough to sit in the silence that follows. That silence may come in the form of avoidance, or anger, or emotional spin, but it is also the clearest evidence of what they will never admit, that they themselves are an illusion built to escape the truth. Carl Jung once wrote, "Those who do not confront their shadow will project it onto others and call it the enemy." The narcissist doesn't hate you. They hate what you make them feel, the truth about themselves. But this isn't just a battle of perception between you and them. It is also your healing journey, because those who've been manipulated, who've questioned their own sanity, who've been blamed for asking honest questions, often carry an invisible scar. And yet you right here, right now, the one listening, observing, choosing clarity, you are already stepping out of that darkness. And once you realize that, you no longer need to argue. You no longer need to be validated. You don't have to be the victim, nor the one who wins. You just need to walk away quietly, but with full sovereignty. They cannot manipulate someone who no longer needs anything from them. They cannot defeat someone who is no longer playing their game. And they certainly cannot survive long in the mind of someone who understands. Truth doesn't need to be proven through conflict. It only needs to be seen and kept. So if you're in that stage of awakening, if you're learning how to ask the right questions, if you're slowly stepping back from the performance they've created, know this: you are not alone. We are here with you not to destroy anyone, but to awaken you back to your truest self. If today's message resonated with something deep inside, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Continue walking with us on this journey of awakening, healing, and understanding the hidden layers of human psychology through the lens of Carl Jung and the light of untwisted truth. Hold on to your peace. Keep asking questions. And remember, when you stop playing their game, you don't lose. You reclaim your life.